The morning sun shone brightly over the royal palace, casting a golden glow across the large square. Tourists had gathered in great numbers, their cameras swinging from their necks, eyes wide with excitement. They whispered to each other and laughed softly, eager to see the famous royal guard standing perfectly still in their red uniforms and tall, black hats. Among the crowd was a man named Leo. He was from a small town far away and had always dreamed of visiting the palace. In his hand he held the leash of his small bulldog, Benny. Benny was a cheerful little dog, round and strong, with short legs that made his waddle look funny. He barked happily from time to time, wagging his stubby tail as he tried to look at all the people around him. Leo smiled at Benny. He loved how the little dog brought joy to everyone around. Children reached out to pet Benny, but he was careful and polite, letting only those who were calm touch him. The crowd's attention was mostly on the royal guards, who stood like statues, unmoving and serious. People clicked photographs, whispered about the precision of the guards, and tried to guess what it would be like to stand so still for hours under the hot sun. Leo watched a young guard named Thomas carefully. Thomas was tall, with a strong posture and serious eyes. He stood at the edge of the palace gate, his rifle held straight. Children nearby were quiet, pointing at Thomas with curiosity. Tourists whispered to each other, impressed by the discipline and calmness of the guards. Benny, however, had his own curiosity. He tilted his head and stared at the tall figure before him. Leo laughed softly, shaking his head. He knew Benny was friendly, but he wondered what the dog would do if he got closer to the guard. Suddenly, Leo loosened the leash slightly, letting Benny move a little. The bulldog waddled forward, his little legs moving quickly across the square. The crowd noticed immediately. Gasps and whispers filled the air. Children giggled nervously, some stepping back in surprise. Benny stopped just a few feet from Thomas, sniffing the ground carefully. The guard's eyes moved slightly, but he remained still. Benny barked once, a small and cheerful sound, and tilted his head again. The crowd froze, watching the unusual scene. Tourists held up their cameras, capturing every moment. Leo felt a mix of excitement and worry. He did not want Benny to cause trouble, but he could not help laughing at the dog's boldness. Benny sniffed Thomas's boots carefully, then looked up at the guard with big round eyes, as if asking for permission to play. Thomas's face did not change, but a small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He leaned slightly to one side, careful not to break his posture. The crowd noticed and whispered among themselves. They had expected the guard to scold the dog or push it away, but nothing of the sort happened. Benny barked again, this time more excitedly. He circled Thomas slowly, sniffing and exploring, making everyone laugh quietly. Children clapped their hands and tourists whispered, "The dog is so brave," or "Look at him, he is not afraid at all." Leo felt proud of Benny. After a few moments, Benny sat down in front of Thomas, tilting his head to one side. He wagged his tail gently, looking happy and calm. Thomas's eyes softened and he knelt slightly, careful not to disturb his posture. He reached out a hand and Benny sniffed it carefully, then licked it gently. The crowd erupted in soft cheers. Some clapped, some laughed, and many took photographs. Leo could not stop smiling. He had not expected Benny to become the center of attention, but the little bulldog had done it effortlessly. Everyone in the square was focused on the unusual friendship forming between the small dog and the serious royal guard. For a few moments, the world seemed to pause. The sun shone warmly, the guards remained disciplined, and Benny sat happily in front of Thomas. The crowd could hardly believe what they were seeing. The little bulldog had brought laughter, surprise, and joy to the palace square, leaving everyone speechless and smiling. Leo patted Benny gently and whispered, "Good boy." Benny wagged his tail happily, looking up at Thomas once more. The moment felt magical, and everyone in the crowd knew they had witnessed something truly special at the royal palace. The crowd around the royal palace was buzzing with excitement. Everyone was talking about Benny, the little bulldog, and his bold interaction with Thomas, the royal guard. Leo held Benny's leash carefully now, making sure the dog did not run again, but he could see Benny's tail wagging with energy. The little bulldog seemed ready for another adventure. Thomas stood up straight again, adjusting his uniform. He looked at Leo and nodded slightly. "Your dog is very brave," he said quietly, his voice calm but friendly. Leo smiled and bowed politely. "Thank you, sir." "Benny is very curious and loves meeting new people," he replied. The crowd was still taking photos and whispering excitedly. Some children pointed at Benny, laughing at the way his short legs made him look like he was waddling on tiny springs. Others were pointing at Thomas, amazed that a royal guard could remain so calm while a dog explored him. Leo noticed a little girl in the crowd who looked nervous. She held her mother's hand tightly and stared at Benny. Benny noticed her too. With a gentle wag of his tail, he slowly walked toward her. The girl's eyes widened, but she did not move back. Benny sat down in front of her and barked softly, as if saying hello. The girl laughed softly and reached out her hand. Benny sniffed it carefully, then licked her fingers. Her mother smiled and whispered to Leo, "He is such a friendly dog. My daughter loves him." Leo chuckled. "He loves making new friends," he said. Meanwhile, Thomas watched everything closely. He had seen many visitors at the palace, but he had never seen a dog capture everyone's attention so quickly. He admired Benny's confidence and calm nature. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax. The little bulldog had brought a rare warmth to the strict palace grounds. Suddenly, one of the tourists dropped a camera on the ground. It made a loud clatter, and some people gasped. Benny, curious as always, ran toward the sound. Leo quickly called his name. "Benny, come back!" Benny stopped mid-step, tilted his head, and looked at Leo. Then, with a small bark, he waddled back to his owner. The crowd laughed and clapped at Benny's obedience. "Such a smart dog," someone said. Another whispered, "He is braver than most people." Leo felt proud, patting Benny's head gently. The bulldog wagged his tail so fast it looked like a small fan. Thomas took a step forward. "Would you like to see the palace courtyard?" he asked Leo politely. Leo's eyes widened. "Yes, sir. That would be amazing." Thomas motioned for Leo and Benny to follow him. The crowd parted quickly, curious to see what would happen next. Some tourists hurried to capture photos of the unusual pair, Leo with Benny, and the serious guard leading them inside the palace grounds. Inside the courtyard, the palace looked even more beautiful. Flowers of many colors lined the stone pathways. Fountains sparkled in the sunlight, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Benny ran a few steps forward, sniffing everything he could reach. He barked happily, chasing a small butterfly for a few moments before returning to Leo's side. Thomas smiled slightly at Benny's energy. "He is full of life," he said. Leo nodded. "Yes, sir. He never stays still for long, but he is very gentle too." Benny wagged his tail in agreement, as if he understood the words. The little girl from before peeked through the gate to see Benny again. She waved shyly, and Benny barked softly in response. The crowd outside cheered again, laughing and clapping. The palace had never seen such excitement over a dog and a tourist before. Leo realized that Benny had not just made friends with people, he had also earned the respect of a royal guard. The moment felt special. It was as if Benny had reminded everyone, even the serious Thomas, that small acts of courage and kindness could bring happiness to many. The sun was high in the sky now, shining warmly over the courtyard. Leo looked at Benny and smiled. "You have made today unforgettable," he said softly. Benny barked as if agreeing and trotted beside him, ready for the next adventure. The crowd outside was still talking excitedly. Everyone knew that Benny, the little bulldog, had done something remarkable. The palace had never seen such a cheerful and brave visitor, and the story of the dog and the royal guard would be remembered for a long time. After spending some time in the courtyard, Thomas led Leo and Benny to a quieter part of the palace garden. The garden was full of colorful flowers, tall trees, and winding paths. Birds chirped above, and the sound of water from a nearby fountain made the place feel calm. Leo looked around in awe. He had never seen a garden so beautiful. Benny, however, seemed more interested in exploring than admiring the scenery. Leo held Benny's leash loosely, letting the little bulldog sniff the flowers and roll on the soft grass. Benny barked happily at a butterfly that flew past, then ran toward a small pond. Leo laughed and called him back. Benny stopped wagging his tail and returned obediently. Thomas smiled quietly at the sight. He had spent years in the palace, but moments like this were rare. Seeing a dog bring such joy to everyone reminded him of life outside strict routines. Suddenly, a commotion arose near the garden gate. A small group of children had gathered around another dog, a golden retriever that had wandered into the palace grounds. The children were laughing and trying to pet it, but the dog seemed nervous and unsure. Benny, ever curious, immediately ran toward the new visitor. Leo quickly followed, worried that Benny might scare the dog. When Benny reached the golden retriever, he sniffed it gently and wagged his tail. The retriever relaxed and began to wag its tail as well. The children cheered, clapping their hands. Benny barked happily as if inviting the other dog to play. Leo watched closely, amazed at how gentle Benny was with strangers, even other animals. Thomas knelt slightly to observe. He was impressed. Benny's calm yet confident behavior was unusual for a small dog. After a few minutes, Benny returned to Leo's side. The golden retriever stayed with the children, who laughed and petted it carefully. The crowd nearby had grown, and more tourists were taking photographs. Everyone seemed delighted by the unexpected interaction between the dogs. Leo patted Benny on the head. "You really are special," he said softly. Benny barked in agreement, hopping happily on his short legs. Thomas then led Leo to a small pavilion at the center of the garden. The pavilion had benches and offered a perfect view of the palace. They sat down, and Leo let Benny rest at his feet. "I have never seen a dog that can bring so much attention and joy without causing trouble," Thomas said quietly. Leo smiled. "Benny has always been curious, but he also knows how to behave. He loves making people happy." Just then, a palace official arrived. She was carrying a small tray with fresh water and snacks for visitors. When she saw Benny, her eyes lit up. "What a charming little dog," she said. "He has certainly made everyone's day." She placed a small bowl of water near Benny, who drank happily. The crowd outside had begun to gather again, and tourists pointed toward the pavilion, taking photographs of Benny with Leo and Thomas. Leo realized that Benny had created something special. People were not just enjoying the beauty of the palace. They were smiling because of the little bulldog's cheerful personality. Children waved at Benny through the pavilion windows, and he barked back, tail wagging. Some tourists whispered to each other, saying that Benny had a magical way of making everyone happy. Thomas stood up and looked around. "You and your dog have done something remarkable today," he said to Leo. "You have reminded people to enjoy small moments, even in the presence of strict rules and routines." Leo nodded, feeling proud. Benny wagged his tail as if he understood Thomas perfectly. As the sun moved higher, the light glimmered through the trees, casting soft shadows on the garden paths. Leo, Benny, and Thomas walked slowly back toward the palace gate, enjoying the peaceful moment. The crowd outside cheered and clapped again when they saw Benny, now a little hero of the day. People whispered stories about how the bulldog had approached the royal guard and brought laughter to the palace. Leo looked down at Benny and laughed. "You have made this trip unforgettable," he said. Benny barked and wagged his tail, ready for the next adventure. Thomas nodded, smiling. The little bulldog had not just impressed the crowd. He had earned respect, created joy, and reminded everyone that courage and kindness could appear in the smallest forms. The afternoon sun shone warmly over the palace grounds, casting long shadows from the trees and the palace walls. Leo, Benny, and Thomas walked slowly through the gardens, enjoying the quiet beauty of the place. Tourists continued to gather near the gates, whispering excitedly about the bulldog who had captured everyone's attention. Leo smiled at Benny, who trotted happily beside him, sniffing the flowers and looking around curiously. Thomas led them to a part of the palace that few tourists could visit. The pathway was lined with tall hedges, and colorful flowers grew on either side. Birds sang in the trees, adding a soft melody to the peaceful afternoon. Benny paused to sniff a patch of bright yellow flowers, his little tail wagging quickly. Leo laughed. "You love exploring everything, don't you?" he said. Benny barked softly as if agreeing. Suddenly, a loud noise came from the other side of the hedges. Leo and Thomas looked up immediately. Benny's ears perked, and he started barking, running a few steps ahead. A small group of children had chased a soccer ball into the garden. They didn't notice the path they were on, and the ball rolled toward the fountain. Benny barked excitedly, running to stop it. The children gasped when they saw the little bulldog move so quickly. Benny nudged the ball gently with his nose, stopping it just before it fell into the fountain. Leo ran to him, laughing. "Good job, Benny. You saved the ball." The children cheered and clapped, impressed by the brave little dog. Thomas nodded, a small smile on his face. Benny had once again brought joy and order to a surprising moment. After a few minutes, the children returned to their parents, holding the ball carefully. Benny wagged his tail happily, then trotted back to Leo. Thomas walked beside them, quietly observing. He has a way of turning ordinary moments into something special, Thomas said. Leo nodded. Yes, sir. Benny always seems to know what to do, even when no one expects it. As they continued walking, they reached a small bridge over a sparkling stream. The water flowed gently, and the sunlight made it shine like liquid gold. Benny paused on the bridge, sniffing the air, and then barked softly at a fish that swam near the edge. Leo laughed and pointed. Look, Benny, a fish. Benny barked again and wagged his tail, watching it carefully. Thomas knelt slightly to observe the scene. He had spent years guarding the palace, but he had never seen a moment so peaceful and joyful. Then a new visitor arrived at the palace garden. It was an older man carrying a small basket of bread. He noticed Benny immediately and smiled. What a charming little dog, he said. He reminds me of the dog I had when I was a boy. Benny wagged his tail at the man and barked happily. The man knelt down and offered a small piece of bread to Benny. Leo hesitated, but Thomas shook his head slightly. He is friendly and it is safe, Thomas said calmly. Benny sniffed the bread carefully, then took it gently. The crowd outside had noticed the new visitor and Benny's interaction. People pointed and whispered excitedly. The dog is so kind, one tourist said. He is like a small hero, another added. Leo felt proud as he watched Benny make yet another friend. The little bulldog had become the star of the palace garden, not through mischief, but through charm, courage, and kindness. As the afternoon continued, Leo, Benny, and Thomas walked further into the garden. They reached a small hill that overlooked the palace square. From there they could see the crowds, the fountains, and the grand palace doors. Benny ran to the edge of the hill, barking softly as if telling Leo and Thomas to look at the view. Leo smiled and bent down to pet him. You are amazing, Benny. Everyone loves you. Benny wagged his tail proudly. Thomas stood silently for a moment, watching the little bulldog. I have never met a dog like him, he said softly. He brings people together, makes them happy, and even teaches a lesson about courage and kindness. Leo nodded. Yes, sir. That is why I love him so much. He is not just a pet. He is a friend to everyone. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting warm orange and pink colors across the garden. Leo, Benny, and Thomas sat on the grass for a while, enjoying the calm moment. The palace had never felt so peaceful and joyful, all because of a small bulldog and his cheerful spirit. Tourists outside continued to whisper about Benny, and children waved whenever they saw him. Leo patted Benny's head gently. Today has been unforgettable, he said. Benny barked softly, wagging his tail as if agreeing. The palace, the guards, and the crowd had all witnessed a day full of joy, laughter, and surprises, all because a little bulldog had dared to step into the royal world. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, the palace grounds glowed with a golden light. Leo, Benny, and Thomas continued their walk through the gardens, following a stone path lined with roses and lavender. Benny trotted happily at Leo's side, sniffing every flower and occasionally stopping to bark at a butterfly. His energy seemed endless, and Leo could not help but laugh at his cheerful little dog. Thomas led them to a section of the palace few visitors ever saw. It was a quiet courtyard surrounded by tall walls covered in ivy. A small fountain bubbled in the center, and birds sang sweetly in the trees. The peaceful setting made Leo feel calm, but he noticed that Benny's attention was already focused elsewhere. The bulldog sniffed the ground carefully and then ran a few steps ahead. Ahead, near a statue of a lion, a stray cat had appeared. The cat's fur was orange and fluffy, and it seemed cautious as it watched Benny approach. Benny barked softly, wagging his tail, and moved closer to the cat. Leo held his leash tightly, ready to call him back if needed. To everyone's surprise, Benny sat down a short distance away from the cat and tilted his head curiously. The cat relaxed slowly and began to approach him. Thomas watched silently. He had never seen a dog interact with a cat in such a calm and careful way. Benny sniffed the cat gently, and the cat purred in response. The children and tourists who had followed them quietly were amazed. Some whispered, "He is so brave and kind," while others laughed softly at Benny's careful approach. Leo smiled proudly. His little bulldog was turning ordinary moments into something extraordinary. Suddenly, a loud shout came from the palace gates. A man had dropped a flag during a ceremony, and it had flown into the garden courtyard. Benny's ears perked up immediately. With a joyful bark, he ran toward the flag, carefully picking it up with his mouth. The crowd outside cheered. Leo ran after him, laughing. "Benny, be careful." Benny trotted back proudly, holding the flag gently in his mouth as if showing everyone he could help. Thomas stepped closer and gently took the flag from Benny. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. Benny wagged his tail, looking proud of himself. The crowd outside applauded. Children pointed and whispered about the Bulldog's courage and intelligence. Leo patted Benny on the head. "You are the hero of the palace today," he said softly. Benny barked in agreement, hopping slightly on his short legs. After returning the flag, Thomas suggested they explore another section of the palace grounds. This area was filled with tall hedges forming small mazes. Leo held Benny's leash tightly as they walked carefully through the winding paths. Benny sniffed every corner, occasionally barking softly at the sound of birds or rustling leaves. The maze seemed magical, with sunlight streaming through the trees and creating patterns on the ground. As they turned a corner, they found a small group of children playing hide-and-seek. Benny barked happily and ran toward them. The children laughed and giggled, inviting Benny to join. He ran between them, carefully avoiding stepping on their toes, and barked softly as if cheering them on. Leo laughed, watching his little bulldog make friends so quickly. Thomas smiled as well. Benny had a special way of connecting with people, spreading joy wherever he went. The children eventually waved goodbye, and Benny trotted back to Leo's side. They reached a hill overlooking the palace square. From this vantage point, Leo could see the crowds below, many of whom were still taking photographs and pointing at the little bulldog. Benny barked happily, wagging his tail, proud of the attention he had earned. Thomas stood beside Leo and said quietly, "Today, your dog has done more than entertain people. He has reminded everyone of kindness, bravery, and joy in small moments." Leo nodded, feeling proud. Benny wagged his tail once more, as if agreeing with Thomas. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the palace, Leo, Benny, and Thomas walked back slowly toward the main square. The crowds cheered and clapped once more, happy to have witnessed the little bulldog's adventures. Benny wagged his tail proudly, enjoying every moment of attention. Leo patted him gently. "You have made today unforgettable," he said. Benny barked softly, looking up at him. Thomas smiled and nodded. The palace grounds had never seen a day so full of laughter, excitement, and surprises, all thanks to a little bulldog with a big heart. As evening approached, the golden sunlight made the palace glow like a painting. Leo, Benny, and Thomas walked slowly through the main square. The crowds had grown curious again, waiting to see what the little bulldog would do next. Benny trotted happily beside Leo, sniffing the ground and occasionally barking at pigeons that fluttered near the fountain. His little tail wagged with endless energy. Thomas led them toward the palace stables, a part of the grounds few visitors ever saw. The stables were filled with beautiful horses, each one calm and graceful. Leo had never been so close to such large animals, and Benny's eyes widened with curiosity. He barked softly at a brown horse that approached, sniffing the air. The horse lowered its head gently as if greeting the bulldog. Benny wagged his tail and barked happily. The stable keeper, an elderly man named Samuel, smiled as he watched the unusual sight. "Most dogs are afraid of the horses," he said. "But your little bulldog seems fearless." Leo laughed. "Benny has always been curious. He loves meeting new friends, big or small." Benny barked in agreement, hopping slightly on his short legs. Suddenly, one of the horses became restless. A young foal had gotten its hoof stuck between the stable fence. The horse whinnied softly, looking anxious. Benny immediately noticed and ran toward the foal. Leo hurried after him, worried that the little dog might get too close. But Benny approached carefully, sniffing the foal and barking softly as if trying to calm it down. Thomas stepped forward and gently moved the fencing slightly to free the foal. Benny stayed close, watching every move. The foal stepped out safely, and the horse calmed immediately. The stable keeper clapped his hands and smiled. "That little bulldog is remarkable," he said. "He seems to know when to act and when to be gentle." Leo patted Benny's head proudly. "He has a kind heart," he said softly. Benny barked happily, wagging his tail like a small fan. After ensuring the foal was safe, Thomas suggested they take a walk toward the palace terrace. The terrace offered a view of the entire grounds, with fountains, gardens, and the square filled with visitors. Leo held Benny's leash tightly as they climbed the stairs. Benny barked excitedly, seeing the wide open space and the sparkling fountains below. Once on the terrace, Leo noticed a young boy near the fountain. The boy had dropped his toy boat into the water and looked disappointed. Benny's ears perked up. With a joyful bark, he ran carefully down the steps toward the fountain. Leo hurried after him, not wanting Benny to fall. Benny nudged the toy boat with his nose, pushing it back to the boy. The boy's face lit up with delight, and he clapped his hands. "Thank you, doggy," he shouted. The crowd nearby cheered and laughed, impressed by the little bulldog's cleverness. Thomas shook his head with a small smile. "Your dog has brought happiness to so many people today," he said quietly. Leo nodded. "Yes, sir. Benny always seems to know how to help and make people smile." Benny barked, wagging his tail proudly. The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple. Leo, Benny, and Thomas walked slowly back toward the palace gate. Tourists clapped and cheered once more as they passed. Benny wagged his tail proudly, enjoying every moment of attention. Children waved at him and he barked softly in response. As they reached the main square, Leo looked down at Benny and smiled. "You have made today unforgettable," he said. Benny barked happily, hopping slightly as if agreeing. Thomas placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You and your little bulldog have reminded everyone here that courage, kindness, and joy can come in the smallest forms," he said. The palace grounds were quieting as the evening grew darker. Lights began to glow along the pathways, and the fountains sparkled under the soft illumination. Benny sat happily beside Leo, looking up at the palace with curiosity. Leo patted him gently. "We still have one more day of adventure, my little hero," he whispered. Benny barked softly, wagging his tail as if promising that he was ready. The crowd outside slowly dispersed, still talking about the little bulldog who had captured everyone's hearts. The palace guards returned to their posts and Thomas straightened his uniform, feeling a quiet pride. Benny had not just entertained the visitors. He had brought joy, courage, and a sense of wonder to the entire palace. Leo, Benny, and Thomas stood together for a moment watching the sunset. The palace seemed magical in the warm evening light, and Benny's cheerful presence made it even more special. It was a day no one would ever forget, all because a small bulldog dared to step into the royal world and share his happiness with everyone. The next morning, the palace grounds were alive with activity once again. Tourists, guards, and palace staff moved about, preparing for a special ceremony in the main square. Leo, holding Benny's leash, followed Thomas through the bustling courtyard. Benny's little tail wagged quickly, and his ears perked up at every sound. The bulldog seemed ready for another day of adventure. Thomas led them closer to the main stage, where musicians were tuning their instruments and colorful banners fluttered in the wind. The crowd was beginning to gather, eager to watch the ceremony. Children waved at Benny, who barked happily in response, hopping slightly as he trotted along. Leo smiled. Benny had already become a star in the palace, and everyone was delighted to see him. As they reached the front of the square, a sudden commotion caught everyone's attention. A large balloon had broken free from a stand and was drifting toward the royal guards. The crowd gasped, unsure what would happen. Benny's ears perked, and without hesitation he ran forward, barking loudly. His little legs carried him quickly toward the balloon, and with a swift nudge of his nose he guided it safely away from the guards. The crowd erupted into applause. Thomas, smiling proudly, knelt down to pat Benny. "You never fail to surprise me," he said quietly. Leo laughed. "He has always loved helping," he replied, smiling down at his little hero. Benny wagged his tail enthusiastically, clearly enjoying the excitement. As the ceremony began, Benny sat obediently beside Leo. The musicians started playing, and the royal guard stood in perfect formation. The crowd watched in awe, but their attention was also on Benny. He barked softly at the music, wagging his tail in rhythm, and some children laughed, pointing at the little bulldog who seemed to enjoy the show as much as anyone. Suddenly, a small group of pigeons took flight from the fountain, startled by the music. The birds flew low over the crowd, and one nearly landed on a tourist's hat. Benny leapt forward carefully, barking, and guided the pigeons safely away from the people. The crowd cheered even louder this time. Leo bent down, patting Benny gently. "You are amazing, Benny," he whispered. Benny barked happily, wagging his tail with pride. Thomas watched silently, impressed by Benny's courage and intelligence. "He has a way of seeing what needs to be done before anyone else does," he said quietly to Leo. Leo nodded. Yes, sir. He has always been careful, but he also knows how to act when it matters. Benny barked again as if agreeing with every word. The ceremony continued with music and dancing. Children waved flags and the crowd clapped along. Benny sat proudly beside Leo, occasionally barking softly at the movements around him. Tourists continued to take photos, capturing the little bulldog in the middle of the royal celebration. Many whispered, saying that Benny had brought life and joy to a place usually so serious and formal. After the ceremony, Thomas led Leo and Benny to a quiet balcony overlooking the square. From there, they could see the entire palace grounds and the excited crowd below. Benny barked happily, watching people wave at him. Leo laughed. Everyone loves you, Benny. You have made the palace a happier place. Benny wagged his tail, clearly proud of his small but important achievements. Suddenly, a young boy ran toward them holding a small wooden toy. Look, the boy shouted. My boat is still safe because of the little dog. Benny barked and ran to the boy, nudging the toy gently with his nose. The boy laughed, clapping his hands. Leo smiled. Benny had once again turned an ordinary moment into something magical. Thomas stood quietly, watching the scene. You and your dog have done more than anyone could imagine, he said softly. You have reminded everyone that courage, kindness, and a little cheer can change a day completely. Leo nodded, feeling proud. Benny barked, wagging his tail happily as if he understood every word. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the palace, Leo, Benny, and Thomas walked back toward the main gate. The crowd cheered and waved, happy to have witnessed the little bulldog's adventures once again. Benny wagged his tail proudly, enjoying every moment of attention. Leo bent down and whispered, You have made this palace visit unforgettable, Benny. Benny barked softly, hopping in excitement. The palace had never seen a visitor quite like him. With each small act of bravery and kindness, Benny had captured the hearts of everyone, leaving the crowd speechless and full of joy. The next morning, the palace square was filled with excitement once again. Today was a special day for the royal family, and tourists had gathered early to witness the event. Leo held Benny's leash tightly, smiling down at his cheerful little bulldog. Benny barked softly, wagging his tail, ready for another adventure. Thomas joined them, adjusting his uniform and smiling quietly. The palace is full of surprises today, he said. I am sure Benny will have a role in it. Leo laughed softly. I think he is always ready for surprises, he replied. Benny barked happily, hopping slightly on his short legs. As the ceremony began, trumpets sounded across the square. The royal guard stood perfectly still, their red uniforms shining in the morning light. The crowd watched in awe, taking photographs and whispering excitedly. Benny sat patiently beside Leo, his ears twitching at the music. Children waved at him and he barked gently in response. Suddenly, a young girl near the fountain dropped her small bag, spilling water and toys onto the ground. She looked worried, unsure what to do. Benny's ears perked immediately. With a joyful bark, he ran toward the girl. Leo followed closely, ready to help if needed. Benny nudged the bag gently with his nose, gathering the scattered toys carefully. The girl clapped her hands and laughed. Thank you, doggy, she said happily. Benny barked in response, wagging his tail proudly. The crowd cheered, impressed by the little bulldog's quick thinking. Thomas watched quietly, a small smile on his face. He has a way of noticing what others miss, he said softly. Leo nodded. Yes, sir. Benny always knows when someone needs help. Benny barked again, hopping slightly as if agreeing. As the ceremony continued, a group of dancers entered the square, performing with bright ribbons. The music was lively and the crowd clapped along. Benny barked softly, wagging his tail in rhythm. Children laughed and pointed at him, delighted to see the little bulldog enjoying the performance as much as they were. Leo laughed too, enjoying the cheerful energy Benny brought to the occasion. Suddenly, a balloon floated loose from the decorations above. The crowd gasped, unsure if it would hit the performers or the tourists. Benny's ears perked instantly. With a determined bark, he ran toward the balloon. Carefully, he nudged it with his nose, guiding it safely away from everyone. The crowd erupted into applause. Thomas bent slightly to pat Benny on the head. Remarkable as always, he said quietly. Leo smiled proudly. You truly are the hero of the day, he whispered. Benny barked happily, wagging his tail proudly. The little bulldog had once again turned a potentially chaotic moment into something magical. After the ceremony, the royal family stepped out onto the balcony. They waved to the crowd, smiling warmly. When they saw Benny sitting proudly beside Leo, they laughed and waved at him as well. The crowd cheered louder, clapping and taking photographs. Benny barked joyfully, wagging his tail as if acknowledging the attention. Thomas turned to Leo. "Your dog has reminded everyone here of courage, kindness, and joy. He is a true ambassador of happiness," he said quietly. Leo nodded, feeling proud. "Yes, sir. He is more than just a pet. He is a friend to everyone." Benny barked again, hopping slightly on his legs, clearly agreeing. As the day came to an end, Leo, Benny, and Thomas walked slowly through the palace gardens one last time. The fountains sparkled in the late afternoon sunlight, and the flowers glowed with vibrant colors. Benny sniffed the air, wagging his tail happily, enjoying every small detail. Leo smiled, feeling grateful for the little bulldog who had made this trip so unforgettable. Tourists waved goodbye to Benny as they left, and children clapped one final time. The palace guards returned to their posts, and Thomas straightened his uniform, feeling a quiet pride. Benny had not only entertained and amazed everyone, but had also brought smiles, laughter, and small acts of kindness that would be remembered by all. Leo bent down, patting Benny gently. "We did it, little hero," he said softly. Benny barked joyfully, hopping on his short legs, happy and proud. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the palace grounds. Leo, Benny, and Thomas stood together watching the sunset. It had been a day full of surprises, laughter, and joy, and Benny had made it magical for everyone. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Leo whispered to Benny, "You will always be remembered here, my little friend." Benny barked softly, wagging his tail one final time, as if promising he would never forget this place either. The palace had seen many visitors, but none had brought so much happiness in such a small and brave form. Benny, the little bulldog, had truly left the crowd speechless.